Hey, today I'm down in the Situation Room and I'm looking at modifying my Lakota Ops AR-15 stock. Now this is a fairly inexpensive polymer stock that's collapsible, obviously, and simply push the button and collapse it. I've already modified it by taking off the extension release here and trimming it here by just sanding it, grinding it down. Just use some sandpaper and sanded it so that I can press, when I press it, it'll go further down because it was having trouble releasing. And again, I've said this is kind of a inexpensive stock, and it's a minimalistic stock. It's got minimal material. It's got a minimal butt pad. I don't need a lot of recoil pad on this AR style rifle. And I was hoping to have a stock that was the right length when it's extended. I'd rather have it be just a little bit longer, but that's okay. I want to have it be as short as possible when it's in the collapse position so that I can fit my rifle inside my new rifle bag, and it's just a little bit too long. So I'm going to do a couple modifications. I think that I can shorten it here, and you can see where my point is here, and I have material on my buffer tube. I think I can drill another hole here and then machine it out and give me another hole right there, and that'll push this location where the pin is at, the locating pin right there, that'll push it further this way. Right now it's all the way in its collapsed position. I think I can move that in and get one more location. When I do that, I'm going to have to shorten the overall stock right here, and I don't think I'll have to worry about that when it's in the fully extended position, that if I'm going to have much more wiggle. I'm going to try to modify it some way to take a little bit of that wiggle out is what I'd like to do too. But most of the stocks that are like this, that are collapsible, wiggle at least that much, if not more. So that's acceptable. But this mechanism right here, this plastic release lever, is questionable on how strong that is with that pivot point and the pins there. But it's acceptable. We'll see how long it lasts. But I want to modify it there. And I think another thing I can do, hold on just a second, let me pause the video and open this up. Another thing I can do is I can screw in that buffer tube just a little more, and it's limited on the buffer pin here. It's limited how it captures the buffer pin there. I may have to make that notch just a little bit deeper right there where it goes around the pin. But I may have to trim the top here because that'll keep the bolt carrier group from going down into the lower receiver. But I don't think it'll hurt to extend the tube into that threaded area. Actually, that might help the bolt carrier group go back into the buffer tube during the recoil. But I may have to trim the top of it here, and I think I can get at least 1/8 of an inch here. I know it's not giving me much, but it'll get me something. It looks like I have at least probably, I don't know, 3/16 of threads left here, so I know I could probably get another 1/8, but it's going to make my buffer tube shorter, and it's going to make my overall length a little bit shorter, but 1/8 of an inch shorter. But it's also going to make my collapsed length 1/8 of an inch shorter, which will help me get it into my new bag. So here's what I'm going to do to the buffer tube, is I'm going to put another hole here, and I'm going to go a 1/64 smaller than these holes. I can always drill it out again if I have to, see how that pin fits into it, to see if it'll fit a little tighter into that hole. But I'm going to put another hole right there and try to use a little bit more of this material here to get me a little closer to my lower receiver. here's what I've got. I've got the buffer tube the way I want it. Now, I drilled a hole, I drilled a pilot hole, and made sure I set my depth to this hole depth, and then I drilled the hole, again setting the depth, and then I milled out this area, and you can see that my buffer tube slipped in my clamp, and my mill went off to the side here on this side. I don't think that'll hurt anything because this whole piece is holding the mechanism, holding the stock on the outside, so I don't think that'll affect anything. I've trial fitted it already and it seems to work okay. So then I used my chop saw and cut this down and a file to clean it up here, and then a little file on the inside to clean up my edge here. And I also did a little bit of a notch into this slot that's already there. I don't know that I needed to do that because it was already almost to the threads, but I thought I'd do it anyway since I was already out in the shop. So that's the buffer tube, and just as a trial, I know that I'm going to go, that's exactly a 1/2 inch. So I'm already from hole center to hole center, I'm exactly 1/2 inch, and that wasn't on purpose. I just went as far as I could go here, and I probably could go a little further if you wanted to. You could probably go down onto this ramp a little bit, but I didn't want to get onto the ramp, so that's why I stopped there, and that ended up being another 1/2 inch from hole center to hole center. So at least I can take a 1/2 inch off the front of here because I know I was going to hit that nut, the nut on the buffer tube. So I know I've going to be able to go at least another 1/8 of an inch, and I think I had about an 1/8 of an inch of a gap already between the end of the stock and the nut, so I might be right where I need to be. I could also take a little bit more off of here, but I need to clean this up once I've trial fitted this. I need to clean this up, maybe heat it a little bit to warm up the plastic to round these edges, or at least a little sandpaper on it. And my nut still threads on okay, so I didn't mess up my threads. This is aluminum. As I'm taking off this buffer tube, I got to remember this plate has the spring in it for the takedown pin. That rear takedown pin has the spring on the far side right here. And when I take that off, I'm going to take off my ambidextrous plate. I'm going to do another take on how to deal with this takedown pin spring. Notice how I'm loosening the nut and then taking that ambidextrous sling mount straight back, and then instead of loosening and take it off, I'm going to tighten it just a little bit so that that spring clears the plate, and it should be sticking out just a little bit. Of course, when you install it, or if it's installed by somebody else, it should have a little bit of grease on it, so it may not come out real easy. So then remove it so you're not abusing it. Now all you have to do is worry about the pin in here, the buffer retaining pin, and now you can screw it up, screw it out. That's removing the buffer tube. Remember your plate, your retaining plate, has this notch in it to help the buffer tube from coming loose, and it has this notch in it to interface with the buffer tube, so it can't turn separately, it has to turn with the buffer tube. And then the same thing going back in, putting the buffer tube back in. There we go. Get the threads to line up. And sometimes you can hold the pin, the buffer spring retaining pin, the buffer retaining pin with your thumb. Sometimes you have to use a punch to get in there. Once you have the buffer tube screwed in where you want it, aligning the notch in the buffer tube here with the pin, then go past just a little bit, open up that hole for the takedown pin, retaining pin spring, put back in there, and now I can push it in a little bit, pull my plate back and turn it over the top and push it straight in, so I'm not abusing that spring, and make sure this notch is lined up into the lower receiver, and I can hold it. Then I can just tighten up my nut, the castle nut. Got that spring underneath that tab, but there it goes. That might be hell to pay to get back out. See, there's the spring. It went in there okay. Now I have very little adjustment in this nut though. I don't know if that was such a smart move. And I got a little bit of a lip there. I think that'll be okay. So make sure my plunger is down in the middle of that slot like it's supposed to be. Now let me tighten up that nut. Pretty good. You'll have to put the upper receiver back on and see if that little bit of a lip makes a difference. I don't think it will. And I think I need to cut a little bit more off. That's sitting down in that last pin yet. Nope. Go a little bit more. Shorten it a little more. See how it does. Yeah, it's still okay there. Still got lots of tube there. Now I'm curious about this, so I want to get the buffer back in and the upper receiver back on. Let's see how that looks. I did have to take it out one turn to make sure that this lip is behind the lower receiver there, so that it'll close properly, so the upper receiver will close properly. Still need to cut about 1/8 of an inch off the stock to get that pin to sit in there. Okay, you can see what that did. It put me right here on this reinforcement piece, so that's about 1/8 of an inch shorter. So I went about 5/8 that I cut off the stock, and that puts me there. Gives me just a little bit of a gap there. A little bit of a wiggle. And that gives me 1/2 inch shorter overall. So all that work for 1/2 inch. I'll have to go see if that fits in my gun case now. Now that concludes the video. If you found it helpful, let me know in the comments, and please subscribe. I look forward to your comments.